Could you folks test your microphones? Go from one. Testing one.
Testing.
One.
1, 2.
Are you one, two?
Check, 1, 2, test. Test, 1, 2, check. 1, 2.
All right, don't be afraid. Listen, you rock and rollers.
A little more on the bass drum, please.
Don't be afraid to speak into the microphone. I know you're all shy, and that's the type of people you are. But
We can't get on the stage.
we had
to have help.
We're
another
such
thing.
hams. We're such hams when we open the refrigerator door. The light comes
Before
on,
we
do
start,
20
I don't
minutes.
want any of you guys to get into any fights up there, okay? Because I know that's another thing with you rock and roll people.
We're all lovers. We don't fight.
Can you lower the ceiling, please? Hey, what happened to all my old girlfriends? They show up?
All right.
There's not enough room in here.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, I want to thank you for joining us today at the El Paso Museum of History. I'm going to hand things over to our interim director, Barb Angus. Barb Angus, ladies and gentlemen.
Actually, this is just a centrifuge for me to test this microphone. Anyway, I'd like to welcome you all to the El Paso Museum of History. This project has really grown on us. It started out as a challenge to back up a program that we actually never did, and the exhibit got to be much, much more important. As you notice, we're calling it El Paso Rock and Roll El Paso Take 1. The stuff that you're coming up with today is going to help us generate the next exhibit. Anyway, we're really pleased with the gentlemen and everybody that has come in the audience that have turned out today to join in this panel discussion. We're hoping to hear a lot of stories, and we have questions for the panelists, and then, as I understand it, y'all will get to ask questions and share stories too. George Reynoso from All That Music is going to be our master of ceremonies, controller, questioner, whatever. We're getting a little bit of feedback. Yeah. Okay.
Because you're standing in front of that speaker, young lady.
All right. Okay. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to George. And look, have fun, everybody. Okay?
Thank you, Barbara. That's what I said too. Let's have fun. We have absolutely no plan. We didn't know what kind of turnout we were going to expect today, but I'm happy that it's respectable. I am George Reynoso. I've got this idea that we're all frustrated musicians. And eventually, as we grow up and hit the real world, we're faced with having to do or find our little niche. And I ended up finding my niche in presenting music. Keep getting this message. Remove the feedback. Listen, this is not about me. This is about our panelists. This is about rock and roll. I want to acknowledge Yolanda Almeida, I want to acknowledge the Museum of Cultural Affairs Department. Yeah, I guess it's still the speaker. For acknowledging that music is an art form, and who would have thought that, over the decades, the function of museums has changed. And for a museum now to acknowledge music as an art form and bring relevancy to the community, it used to be museums were like a highbrow place that, for high art and educated people, and that notion over the decades, especially the last decade, has gone. And you're seeing the proof today that a local museum can find something that is dear to the heart of a community, a subject like rock and roll. We can bring out this fabulous exhibit that's nothing more than relics, but it's our history, it's our heritage, and rock and roll is so dear to our hearts. I mean, I'm just flattered that the city has put this together and that we can just have a loose discussion about the genesis of rock and roll in our community. Now, rather than read a lengthy bio on the panelists, I think we'll just start by naming the panelists, and I'm going to ask you all have microphones, you can share amongst yourselves, okay? But I'm going to start with the panelists. I'm going to ask you to give me a couple of minutes, little short bio on who you are, who you played with, what you're doing now, and just a little bit about yourself, like a nutshell for a couple of minutes. Once we do that, I've got some questions I think that are, I've been curious about over the years. And then I don't know how long that's going to go on, but eventually I'd like to encourage, if anybody out here has got any commentary or questions, just walk up here underneath this light, and we'll find a way to get the microphone to you so you can ask any of the panelists a question. Let's start with Bobby Rosales. Bobby, grab the mic.
Got the mic. I'm Bobby Rosales, and I used to have a band named Bobby the Premiers. We performed here and there and out of town and everywhere. We traveled with different artists, Stevie Wonder, little James Brown here and there too, and J.J. Jackson, the Shirelles, and the, geez, I can't even remember these songs. That's why they put us in the museum, because we're so darn old. But anyway, I really enjoy being here. I think it's a great thing for all the musicians in El Paso that can follow up with this. I mean, and I just want to thank you for everything that Ray and all the guys, Rick and people that are contributing to this. I left a whole bunch of pictures, but they didn't put them up. I think they sold them, I think. I don't know. But anyway, I just want to thank all of you, and I'm pleased to be with all these guys here. I remember this guy when I was a kid, but the Rhythmers, and I've always thought very highly of them. They played good, and I really enjoyed it. I think that's what kicked me going. And a lot of these guys, Rod, and he's just getting down. I think he's doing his thing. But anyway, I just want to thank you for letting us be here and talking to you people. And I enjoyed it. And I really had a great time in playing and enjoyed it. I played for many, many years. And I just want to thank you. Okay.
First of all, I want to thank, let's give a big hand for Jim Murphy, who put all this thing together.
Yeah, Jim Murphy, stand up, would you?
Jim, there's a course you can take on how to operate the
We're going to acknowledge Jim at the end of the presentation. So, Jim, you've got yours coming, and we're going to get you up here before this is out.
Okay, my name is Carlos Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, not Ruz, Raz. I first, I guess I'm the oldest one here, huh? Maybe. I started, I started in 1954 probably playing music. I was like 13 years old. I was a drummer. Me and Bobby Fuller, his drummer, used to play in the Sleda. We're in a Sleda band. And he's who started a band. He asked me, hey, you want to help me play guitar with me? I can't. I was playing with a group called the Rhythmers, and we had a record out, Cradle Rock and Strange World, and it was doing good. We got $2,000 a piece, which was, in those times, a lot of money. A lot of money. But they made more, but that's another story. Anyway, I stayed here till about 1959. I wanted to go to UCLA, and the only way I could do is to go to California. So I went to California. Ended up graduating from UCLA and playing music. I became what they call a utility musician. I worked with everybody. You name it, I worked there. From the Carpenters to Don Ho, Engelbert Humperdinck, all the old groups, although there's 1,000 groups, the oldies. I work with all of the Shirelles, and I have it. Anyway, and I stayed there for 32 years, and I was working in Vegas, and Humperdinck decided to retire, so I said, well, it's a good idea. I'll go back home, see the old people. I came home, and I'm here, and I was up to a year ago. I worked a year with Little Mike, which was my old band. Little Mike and the Blue Kings, or what I think that's what he calls himself. But I had to quit because I can't stand up too long. But I'm glad to be back, and I'd like to pass the mic to
Dalton Powell is
Bolton.
next.
I'm Dalton Powell, and I started playing music When I was about 16 or 17, I learned to play the piano a little bit from my good friend Jim Reese, who played piano and guitar and a little bit of everything. And he showed me that you can actually play neat stuff on the piano, because I had taken lessons for years and hated it. But when Jim taught me how to bang those chords and play the old Fats Domino and Jerry Lee Lewis stuff, I started doing it just for fun. Some of my friends found out that I could play a little bit, so they asked me to join their band. And I did that for a while, but every time we'd have a rehearsal or even on the breaks, I'd get behind the drums and bang on them just for fun. And pretty soon guys just started calling me and said, hey, I hear you can keep a beat. You want to play tonight? So I never really asked anybody for a job. They just kept calling me, so I guess I had something that they liked. But played out in Northeast for a while with several bands out there. And Bobby was a drummer with a band that I played with before I played drums with him. And on his very first recording with a guitar, I played drums on it. I had one brush and a snare drum, and I just went little song called You're in Love, but that was his first recording, and I played drums on it. Over the years, he had several drummers during his career, but I was his first and his last drummer. And then I came back to El Paso, and after Bobby died, played with Rod Crosby for a while. That was always fun. We used to play the clubs out at Fort Bliss. They were the hot places to play in the 60s and 70s because I don't think they had any age limits. And all the ladies from El Paso would come out there because I guess they felt safe. And yeah, they'd bust them out there to dance with the GIs. That's where I met my beautiful wife, Catherine, out at Fort Bliss Officers Club one day. Didn't get much done that day. And I played with Rod and did that for off and on for a number of years. After that, I played with Moon Pie, with Doug Neal, an old friend of mine, Randy Jones, and Jack Woodbury. A bunch of great musicians played with that band over the years. That was also a real good party band. We had a great time with Moon Pie. And since then, I just kind of been drifting around, playing with whoever would put up with me. Don't play much anymore, but I'm still here. I play mostly for my own amusement in my den now at home. That's who I am.
Thank you, Dalton.
Take over. Rick.
Up next is Rick Kern.
Now it works. Everybody, I'm Rick Kern. Started playing in El Paso at the age of about, I guess I was about 11 or 12 when I first started drums. 5 years ago. Yeah, just a couple of years ago. And my big thing was always real good vocal music. I really, to this day, love good vocal harmony. And one of the things that I did with all of my groups was try to, emphasize good, strong vocal music. And back in the 60s when I was playing with local bands, we did a lot of jobs like the Henchmen and many of the groups did back in those days. The Instigators, my friend Doug over here, we played a lot of parties after football games and things at high school dances. And one of the groups I played with was called the Masters of War, and I know it sounds kind of weird, but it was a pretty neat group. We had a guy by the name of Pat Lowe in there, and Mike Wall, and Mike McGill, and Dennis Martin's brother, just a bunch of really good musicians that played in that group in and out. After that, I played with a group in El Paso called the West Hampton Barge. After Jack left the group, I played with them for a while. And then after that, would have been a couple of years after Bobby died, I was with a group called the Basic Sound, and in that group was the lead guitar player from Bobby Fuller, Jim Reese, and Gail Hageman, and Richard Greco, who currently plays with a local band called Hot Pursuit, and myself. And then we had several musicians that came in and out of that group, some awfully good ones, Mark Cianferrani, Jeff Lynn, several groups that played with our group, and we played at the Knights Club for, I think 2.5 years of the 5 years we were together. We played there. I know I was going to college at UTEP and playing 6 nights a week. It was it was great to have a good place to play and not have to worry about whether we were going to have a gig to play or not. It was nice for many years to be playing with that band. And then after that, I was with a group called Macadamia, and then we played out at the Red Flame on Dyer for about a year, and then that group pursued some other endeavors. We put together a Las Vegas vocal show band and moved out to L.A., and my wife Sharon and I traveled with this group for out in L.A. for about a year, and then we formed another group called Tapestry, and that was my group that pretty much had the opportunity of really hitting the big time. We were supposed to be on the Captain and Tennille TV special with Neil Diamond. We had signed our contracts with Dick Clark up in Studio City, and we were all good to go, and none of the networks picked up the contract. So that was kind of the epitome of the crazy music business. You know, it was soon after that my wife and I decided it's time to come back to El Paso and start a family. And so we've got two great kids. They're both musicians. One of them plays in a band in Austin right now. In fact, we're going to see her graduate in about another week. And so we get our pay raise pretty soon. And our son graduated last year, and he's a musician, photographer as well. My daughter's a photographer as well. They're both good musicians. But it's a pleasure to be with you all today, and I thank you for coming.
Thank you, Rick. Hold on a second there, Doug. Since Rick didn't do it, I'm going to give you a shameless plug for musiciansofElPaso.com. If you haven't been there, musiciansofElPaso.com is Rick's personal blog, and he's invited any musician, whoever was a musician or thought he was a musician, to post onto the site. But he has cataloged at least 250 last count of the old names of people that were doing live music in our community through the 50s and 60s. You must have at least 500 photographs in there. I don't know, but I know, Rick, you've got some cards, and I hope you brought some today. But if you want to post anything to that, I know Rick doesn't have any agenda other than to give acknowledgement to all the great musicians that came and have been from our community. So that's musiciansofElPaso.com. Make sure before you leave today that you get a card from Rick. Okay, now the legendary Doug Neal.
Legendary. That was shameless, by the way. My name's Doug Neal. I like Dalton, started playing piano when I was a kid. My mom played piano, and I did too. And decided I'd be a rock and roll piano player and play Jerry Lee Lewis and Fats Domino, same stuff. And ended up playing bass by accident way back in the late 50s. A guy named Tommy Carr. Remember Tommy Carr? Lent me his bass and his rig, and I started playing. We didn't have a bass player, so I started playing bass. And that was a group called the Emeralds, I think. But anyway, it was, I remember that first gig we played was, Dalton was playing piano, and Bobby Fuller was actually playing drums at Northgate. It was a battle of the bands. And I went through a bunch of people and the instigators, and when Randy Fuller had his group put together, I went and played with him. And we put together Moon Pie in 1970 and had that for, I don't know, still. And Dalton played with Moon Pie, and Rod played with Moon Pie. El Paso played with Moon Pie. And all great people, but the core group is still together with Jack, David Rutledge, and Jack Woodbury, and Randy Jones. We still play sometimes. And did that for a long time and just tried to promote El Paso music that was more original than cover music, and always did that, and that's always been my push, and make albums and make records. And I did a lot of studio work, playing bass at local studios for other people's albums or songs or whatever needed to be done. Still doing that. Now I play in church, and I also play with a group called PT and the Cruisers, which is some old folks. Patty just got in, she's not too old, but younger than me, all of them. Really good band. We still play around town a little bit. So I got a pretty long, short history. But I've been doing this for a long time in this town and love it. And we'll do it till I can't do it anymore. So that's me.
Thank you, Doug. And our last panelist, Rod Crosby.
Good afternoon. Well, first of all, Check, check. Yeah, no, it's just a wireless mic. It's the wireless is not latched. Anyway, to further what George said, hats off to Mr. Jim Murphy, too. He's the guy who coordinated all of this, and we appreciate it very much. It's really a great thing. Currently, I have a sound company called Crosby Sound Lighting and Video and Backline Services. In a studio called Rosewood Studio. I came to El Paso in 1959
I get to talk
accidentally. And I played Hawaiian lap steel out in California prior to that, playing specials on Sunday morning in the Assembly of God Church, so that's my gospel background. Came here, long story short, saw Bobby Fuller accidentally in 1959 performing at Skyline's Bowling Alley, and prior to that, Buddy Holly had been my greatest influence in terms of rock and roll, and I'd memorized an entire album just for the lack of something better to do on a summer vacation. And was approached by a guy named Bob Wilson, whose brother Bill Wilson was in a band called the Rock Kings, one of the original, probably professional groups in El Paso, you know, along with Bobby and Premiers, a lot of groups like that. And I sort of came into it sideways, became a lead singer and a guitar player, and then it became Rod Crosby and the Intruders. And that's pretty much it. Just have my own company now. My wife and I operate Crosby Sound and Lighting and Video. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Rod. Let's go way, way back. You know, you could argue that rock and roll started sometime in the post-World War II optimism, liberalism. By the 1950s, the black scene was doing really what you could call early rock and roll. They termed the name rock and roll. I got a couple of questions and a couple of directions we could go with here, but let's get this out of the way. Who were your earliest influences? In particular, if you were brought up in this region, El Paso, okay? If you were raised elsewhere, disregard that. But if you grew up around here, who were your influences that drove you to performing and to doing music? And I'll let the first one of you that wants to speak address that.
Oh, I will.
Go ahead.
I'm not scared. No, Jim Reese is the one that got me started in it. He started playing guitar and piano when he was still in high school, probably 14 or 15, and he started picking up on stuff like, you know, Carl Perkins and Jerry Lee Lewis and people like that, you know.
Okay. Was it the radio, though? Was radio the big catalyst?
Well, the radio is where we got our music, but you know, Jim is the one that inspired me to take that music and actually start playing things. You know, I always enjoyed listening to it, but I never considered playing it until I got to be friends with Jim, and he's the one that got me into it.
Did you look up to someone that was like an idol?
Well, ever since the first song I can remember, rock and roll song, was Bill Haley and the Comets.
That was
Rock Around the
55.
Clock.
Yeah.
And as soon as I heard that, I was hooked on rock and roll. And I remember laying in bed late at night and listening to Wolfman Jack and guys like that. Late
So it
night
was radio.
on the radio.
Hey, Bobby, what in particular, I know because El Paso now maybe is 80% Latino, Hispanic, Mexican-American, whatever you want to call it. Back in the 60s, it was probably closer to 65 or 70. The cultural difference of maybe where your neighborhood, the Anglo guys, the Latino community, address how you all regarded each other and those different music scenes back then, if you would.
First of all, well, there was a lot of problems with, if you were white, you would play at a nice club. If you were Latino, you would play. If you were black, you would play the black society. And to me, I enjoyed everybody. Bobby Fuller, the group's rock and roll. I like rock and roll, but my thing was rhythm and blues. I like horns behind me. Okay? And we did a lot of this stuff where we really enjoyed ourselves to play, and it was hard, but anybody can do it. I went through, from the ditch to whatever. I performed, and before I know it, I was performing everywhere. I traveled with a lot of artists, like I said again, and I enjoyed to see groups from El Paso do good because it's so important for this town of El Paso. If everybody would say, "Where you from, man? You really can gig, but where are you guys from? Where you, El Paso? Where in the heck is that?" And then I said, "El Chuco." They would understand if they were Spanish. I would say, "El Chuco." That's it, man. That's it. Do you know this guy? Do you know that guy, the Chango, the Chino? I said, "No, And sometimes you would just have to say, "Okay, yeah, I remember those guys. Used to climb those trees quite a bit." But music has always been good to me, and I did a lot of traveling, like I said, and I did a lot of work with Steve Krosno too. We performed quite a bit. He would always ask me, "Hey, Bobby, where are you going to play? Can I take my discotheque?" I says, "What is that?" Well, I should have never done that because he took away the band music away from everybody. But anyway, I really enjoyed him. He was a good man, and he did a lot for the Latinos. Let me tell you something. He did a lot for the Mexican people, for the blacks, and even for the Anglos. I mean, I hate to put it in names, but that's the way it used to be. And he did a heck of a job and I did my first recording with him. This is the beginning. He says, "What are we going to do?" He says, "Well, this is the beginning." So that wasn't the song that I was recording. I was recording another song. And he says, Steve Krosno said, and not only that, we were at this house, one microphone, and I said, "Jeez, what a horrible recording." But anyway, so I enjoyed it, We had a good time. And he says, "Bobby," he says, "you did this song now. We need another song for the other side." "What for?" "Well, you got to put it in the other side of the record, right?" So I wrote "This is the beginning," and it probably at 15, 20 minutes, play this part, blah, 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 and you can tell by the words. And needless to say, that song was number one for around 14 weeks or something like that. I said, "Jesus Christ, can't believe it." But anyway, I really enjoyed them. We did a lot of more recordings, and everything that I did was all original. I never did copy anybody. And the other day, my granddaughter says, my daughter-in-law says, "Papa," they call me Papa. Of course, you got grandchildren, right? And you're the Papa. "Papa, you're really getting famous." He says, "Why?" He says, "In the internet, they got a song of you, and they play 30 seconds of it." I said, "What is it?" He said, "I don't remember that," but he says, "Play it. Here it goes." And it was James Brown's song. I said, "I didn't record that." Well, what happened, somebody recorded in the gig what I played, and they put it in, and now it's selling strong over there in the East Coast. So I said, "Well, but who's paying me for this?" Nobody. Of course, nobody's going to pay you for it.
I want to get to that question of compensation for you guys, but Doug, a little earlier, you mentioned something interesting. You talked about the Mexicans, and I was wondering if you could speak to the social and the racial climate for musicians back in that period. Were you relegated to places you didn't go, places you were asked to play? Was it really that segregated?
Yeah, but not really. I grew up on Delta Street, and my early influences were, I remember going to hear a band at Henderson. I went to Henderson when they first opened. And there was the Teenage Rockers, and this was Goofy and Manny, who was the drummer for the Night Dreamers, and Goofy was Goofy did everything. So all of my friends down there, being in a definite minority at Clarity and Henderson, all those kids were from Diablo, and then behind me, Chicken Gomez and his brother who played at the lobby and around town. They lived in the street behind me in Cortez, and so I didn't really think about that much. But back then, there was some clubs called the Black and Tan, but I went to the Black and Tan, and a white guy played the organ there, Reese, and I don't know, the musicians went anywhere they wanted to, and we garnered, "Oh, don't touch them, they're musicians." I remember one time going to hear the Night Dreamers at the Sacred Heart down in the Segundo Barrio, and me and this blonde girlfriend of mine, Ann, and we walked right down the middle, and it was interesting. But because the guys were here and the girls were there, and they were all looking at me like that, and Goofy went over to him and said, no, they're with us, and he's a musician. So I was okay, because I was a musician. But all of those people were my friends. So my early influences there were that R&B touch from the Night Dreamers, and Danny and Bobby was the kind of the Scarity, so he was nearby, and all these guys, and of course Long John was a big influence of mine and of everybody's. We all learned to play a shuffle watching those guys, and then Bobby Sotelo. I watched Bobby Sotelo play bass, and that's where I learned how to make my hands look real cool. Actually, I think Laura was with me. Look at that guy's hands. They're so cool. Plays so cool. And then, of course, when I played with Randall Fuller, I'd played bass for quite some time, but Randall used to beat me over the head to play this way with a lot of power, etc. So Randall, I would say my bigger influence were local folks from all aspects. Bert Peters lived on the street next to me, and Bert was a great drummer at 12 years old. He was in my first band. So I had but when people would go here, they would go hear Rod at Cathedral, or then these teen clubs sprung up, and they tended to be kind of, the white kids went there, and the black kids went, or well, there weren't many black kids, but the brown kids went there, and we had several of those places around town, Johnny Fairchild's place, and Bobby's place out northeast, and we had a club out, Continental Ballroom, way out on Montana, which is in the middle of town now. But one time, we played at Johnny's Fairchild's place, which was now owned by a guy named Ed Fuentes. And the Night Dreamers were upstairs, and the Instigators were downstairs, and we had a great time. So music transcended all of that. And I remember going with Crosno, me and Crosno and Randy Russ, who played guitar with me, got in the car with Crosno and went and picked up James Brown at the airport. He was doing a concert here, which was kind of cool. And I remember Sonny Powell was there, and he was singing, "Please, please, don't go," as soon as Crosno got off the plane. James Brown. So all of that stuff went away for the musicians in town. And quite frankly, El Paso wasn't that way, like El Chuco wasn't that way back then. And I grew up down on Delta, so I never thought about it. But as I think about it now, we as musicians had some immunity from some of that, I think.
You know, the drug culture exploded in the 60s, and the Beatles did some of their best work on LSD and marijuana. But as musicians, talk to me a little bit about the drug culture. Did you all utilize that as a creative resource? And I don't expect you all to fess up to anything necessarily, but did you all use it as a creative resource, or was it a destructive force for your bands? And I'll let any of you speak to that.
Talking about yesterday or a while back?
I'll jump in here real quick.
Thank you, Rick.
Back in the 60s, probably 67, 68, I had a little band called the Sacred Mushroom. Yeah. That group lasted less than a year, but it was all about psychedelic. It was a part of a movement that really didn't last very long, especially in El Paso. I think if you were out in Haight-Ashbury or in California or something, yeah, it certainly lasted a lot longer out there with the flower power and everything. But here in El Paso, that was certainly not the case for something that was going to have longevity. This group, we did a lot of Grace Slick and stuff like that, and it did talk a lot about the drug culture. None of us in our group did any of that. We didn't do any grass. We didn't do any LSD. We weren't doing any of those things. But at the same time, there were other groups that were doing that, but we chose not to be a part of it. We certainly wanted to sing about it though, because it was something that was going on at the time, and it needed to be told. It was an interesting period of time though. I remember that group when we played. It was we had a keyboard player by the name of Donna Pence. I hadn't seen Donna in about 30, 35 years, and recently it was wonderful. She's a great musician, a great songwriter. She's done some things off Broadway up in the Northeast in New York. And recently we just had a nice reunion, and you may have seen some of that on my site, some pictures of us. But we had Zoomer Roberts, who's sitting here with us today, Charlie Thomas at his house. We had a real nice reunion over there, and it was just wonderful being back with Donna again and reliving the old days and the music that we used to sing and everything. Great people, great times.
Any other commentary on the drug culture of the period?
Well,
Rod?
what I've noticed, the groups that were extremely successful and had longevity worked either other jobs or went to school, and that didn't fit into the schedule. We probably would have done that if we'd had silver spoons in our mouth. It didn't work out that way, and that's really good because that's what made the bands what they are. And some of them are still around today.
We would be remiss if we didn't discuss Bobby Fuller, and certainly a lot of people probably came here today with the idea we might find out how Bobby really died, and I think we all agree that we're not even going to go there. But Bobby arguably is the most successful musician to come from our community. I think I Fought the Law charted at number 8 on the Billboard charts back in 1966. The charts and the music industry has changed. I know that there's a lot of other successful musicians that are doing rock and roll, but it's certainly more fragmented. But let's talk a little bit about Bobby, and I guess Dalton, you had the privilege of knowing and working with him for the longest period of, or more frequently than the rest. And I certainly want all of you to jump in. But as far as Bobby, talk to us a little bit about the man that maybe was not, that we didn't know, a guy with the kid with the warts and the real guy. Who was he? What inspired him? Was he a leader? Was he, talk to me. How was he regarded among musicians?
Well, a lot of them kind of were jealous of him because his dad was an engineer with the gas company, and he made plenty of money, and he was always there to help Bobby with the best equipment, and he had the best of everything. And I think a lot of guys resented that because they had to go out and buy their stuff and work for it. And Bobby had kind of an ego, too. He was kind of an odd guy. And like I said, some guys didn't like him, some guys did. But once he got on the stage, everybody respected him. And they knew that he was going to be a good singer-guitar player. And he was just one of those guys that was more obsessed with it than everybody else. I mean, he pretty much lived his music. And if anybody got in his way, he just kind of, So he probably made a few enemies, but as a whole, Bobby was a good guy. He and I were great friends. And for some reason, he just liked the way I played. And when he first went out to California, he took a guy named Dwayne with him because I had a new baby and a job here. And I didn't really see any future in just packing up and going out there. But after he'd been out there about 9 months, he called me about a dozen times wanting me to come out and play with him because he just wasn't getting along with Dwayne. And I just had something that Bobby liked, so he and I just managed to stay great friends the whole time.
Carlos, you were nodding your head in agreement when Dalton said Bobby had some enemies. I wonder if you could elaborate.
I lived in Loma Terrace. I was a little bit older than Bobby. I was 2 years older. And I was first drummer with a band, with a Isleta band. I was 17 years old. And Bobby was the type that, like he says, we used to call him, between us, we'd say he's 90%. Because he was kind of flighty at the time. He was, wasn't he? He was
an artiste.
No, he didn't play nothing. He wasn't a good drummer. He wasn't good. I had the rhythmers. We had a number 4 record. I got the chart there. 1959. We had So we were making money all over the place. And he used to tell me, hey, I'm putting together a band. Come and play. I don't have time to play. You don't. But anyway, I guess what I wanted to get back to was you were talking about what the differences. Now, I'm from 1954, before these guys. So when they're talking, I already was in California. I played at Isleta High one time. They played Lubbock. My band played. They used to call them some kind of dance, victory dance. So we won. Oh no, they won, and so we still had the victory dance. A couple of white 4 white cheerleaders came up, and they really liked the band. And since I was a little bit different, I did Rock Around the Clock. Because guitar players couldn't play the lick. I could. There's a little riff in the, and then they I bet you don't know Elvis. Well, we did an Elvis song, you know. And most of the guys didn't want to do it. Play that music. We play. But anyway, we went to, they hired us, signed a contract. So we go to Lubbock. We're in one car. We got the bass fiddle on the top, and we're going. So we stop at the first stop. I had Arthur Wheeler with me. He was our singer. He was black. So we stop at a hamburger place. So I walk up there and I said, let me have 7 hamburgers. He said, "Tu hablas inglés?" Yeah? Can't you read the sign up there? What does it say? I don't want to repeat what he said, but you know. And I said, well, wait a minute. You can't buy here. I didn't have a white person with me. It was all Mexicans and not one black. So my Wheeler said, I know what, let's go to the back part of town. We can eat there. So we went in. So when we got to the girl's place, the little blonde girl came on and she said, okay, the party's going to be here. And so, okay. And the mother comes out. He says, let's say, I don't remember her name, but let's say, Linda, what did you do? This is the band. They can't play here. Oh, what are we going to do, Mom? I didn't know. There was the band that plays. Well, you put them in the back and let them play in the back. And we're used to that. That was my little part that I was trying to say.
Got it.
And going back to the roots of rock and roll in here in El Paso, they probably started in 1952 and 53. I was like maybe 12 or 13. And there was a group called the Hi-Fis. I don't know if they remember the Hi-Fis. Okay, they were older guys. They played what you would call swing blues now, or swing. But it was like kind of like rock and roll. It was like Louis Prima and all that stuff. That's who I got my influence from. And then there was a radio, the first rock, and I want everybody to remember because nobody remembers. It was on Saturdays they would put away all the how much is that dog in the window, and they would play what they called rhythm and blues then, the black rhythm and blues. The guy's name, he had a little radio station, one room behind Bowie High School. His name was Bert Wallen. You guys know Bert Wallen. He was a steel guitar player with Mike Oatman. And
He would play black records.
he would play the rhythm and blues. Chuck Berry and Fats Domino. So there was a club on what is that? Highway, not Alameda. Rusty's. Anybody remember Rusty's? Big Rusty's. You remember Rusty's? Yeah. Big Rusty. Yeah. And he used to have Fats Domino and Chuck Berry and us to play in there. See, Fats Domino and Chuck Berry would draw the blacks, but they wouldn't draw the Chicanos, so they would put us to draw. So I got to meet them all. I introduced Papoose, Fats Domino's guitar player, to the girl that he married, who he's still married to. He's got like 10 kids now. But I got to meet them all. I got to know them in the dressing room, and I used to see him drink the liquor, and we didn't do drugs. They did. Maybe somebody did marijuana. Ray Charles came to town one time. They came to the Coliseum, and we played the intermission, and they had a trumpet player, a young kid. He was my age, and we were talking in the dressing room, and he says, "Man, this is rough playing with these old guys. They're all winos, man. They hit the liquor hard and that." And we talked, and he says, "Well," I said, "What do you want?" He said, "Well, someday I want to be an arranger." Quincy Jones was the trumpet player.
Wow.
I saw him in L.A. I was playing with Patty Page. You remember How Much Is the Dog in the Window? Well, we were doing the country clubs, and he came in one time, and I said, "Don't you remember me?" We talked. I guess he did it a lot, but that was what I wanted to do. Anyway, then we had, after that, Bert Wallen had a program. We had another guy that you guys never seem to talk about. His name was Rudy Tejas. He had a program called 430 Hop. That was the #1 program in El Paso.
Was this like 61,
No.
58?
This is 55, 56, 57. Yeah.
Huh.
Rudy became
The
Johnny
executive
Carson's
producers.
producer.
Executive producer. Yeah.
And then he had a fight with him. When I got to meet him in L.A. I was working at the Whiskey a Go-Go with Trini Lopez. He was from Houston. He was another guy that was famous. He made it, but I guess nobody remembers him anymore. But I was playing with him, and he came in one time, and he says, "I want you to go to my show that I'm doing on Johnny Carson," because he was our manager with the Rhythm Airs. He used to get us jobs and stuff. So I went one day and I saw the show, and that was it. It was good. You know? And I didn't see him for about a year. Then I read in the paper that he had been fired by Johnny Carson. He had a disagreement. Johnny Carson was real hard to work with. And one day I was working the mood music for the Mothers-in-Laws, which was a program that was on TV. And Johnny walked in, stood there at the door. And he says, "Can you cut it down?" He wanted the music to stop. The director went, "Stop." Because he was doing something next door. He was practicing something, and he didn't want
Carlos, you're full of great stories. I mean, we could go on. I need to keep it moving,
Yeah.
but please, we need
Go ahead.
to keep coming back to you. I want to wrap up on any other good Bobby Fuller stories.
Well, this
Rod?
is just an insight. As he said, there are other people that don't get mentioned. As far as I'm concerned, it should have been called the Fuller Brothers all along, because Randall was like bass, like spell it B-A-S-E. He was the bassist of the group, and that's what cultivated and gave Bobby the confidence and the empowerment that he had to utilize everything, that the talent that he had inside of him. Otherwise, songs like Let Her Dance wouldn't even exist, because my understanding is he was playing some bass line over and over again, and Bobby asked him, "What's that?" And he goes, "I don't know, it's cool, I like it." So they wrote Keep On Dancing, and evolved in one of the best songs they ever did, Let Her Dance. So I always try to bring up Randall because he's still around, you know, and I think that would have ran its course. I think Bobby was ready to move on at the point that he died. But from that time till that point in time, it wouldn't have happened without Randall. So I just think he just deserves a lot of credit. Not the 100% as much as Bobby, but a bunch. So that's my speech.
Over the years, I'm sorry, Rick, go ahead.
I was just going to say I've been in contact with Randall, and he's living out in California, still playing. Has a group called Fuller Drive, and real nice trio. They've been together for several years, doing not a lot of playing, but quite a bit, enough to keep him happy. And he's got his own studio, so he's doing some nice things out there, and comes to El Paso every once in a while. I was just going to add, one of my early inspirations when I started playing was publicly was going to the Skylanes Bowling Alley. My dad on Thursday nights would be out there playing on a bowling team. And it was always fun to go out there because Mike McGill, who was one of the bass players that I played with back in those days, and we would go out there and we would hear the band playing at the Little Dipper Lounge there at Skylanes. And I would stand at the front door in just in awe watching Bobby and this guy sitting next to me play. And, of course, these guys were about 6 years older than I was, so all I could do is stand in front of the door. They were already 21, so they were legal inside the club doing their music. But it was always fun to hear these guys every week. It was a highlight of my life when I first started playing drums, to go and hear these guys play their music, because they were one of the best things that ever happened in this town. Great musicians.
Doug, you want to say something? Let's keep moving a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the business of music. The stories of artists in the 60s who didn't own their own publishing, who the record label was everything and the record company made everything. Those stories out there are legendary. I could go in a few directions with this question, but I want you to address a little bit about how much a musician got paid, let's say a 5-piece band at the time, let's say in 62, 68. What was your compensation like? And then I'll move on to another part of that question, and I'll open this up to all of you.
Okay, well, I'll start off by saying the first job that I had with the Intruders was paid $10 a guy, and it was the Plaza. What's now the Plaza Hotel was the Hilton. That's how far back that was. That was 1960. So that's where it started. $10? Wow, to do this? Anyway, that's just a starting point, so you guys take it from here.
Most of us played what Dalton talked about before. We played at Fort Bliss gigs. And in fact, one at McGregor was what Dalton was referring to as we'd go down and we'd load up our stuff, and they'd pile us in with a whole bunch of women and take them out to the troops at McGregor. And that's what he's talking about. They used to bus girls out there, not real pretty ones. But we made $60 for the band, and that's if there was 2 guys or 20. And we made $60 for the band from the government. And there were,
What year was this?
I don't know,
Kind of like?
62 maybe. And that's why I don't know. And I remember when we had Gorilla, I remember we were playing at a place called Purple something. Bob Camise owned it. And, no, wait, before that, after that. Anyway, I got in a fist fight with a guy going for $100 a night because it was just packed in there. This guy didn't make a lot of money. So I got in a Purple Pussycat or something like that. And we got in a fist fight over $100 for the band. And because he was paying 65, and this was in 1970, maybe. So that's how that went.
Dalton, any thoughts on what were you privy to as far as money with the Bobby Fuller Four? How was the income stream distributed, if you will, with Bobby and the Fuller Four?
I remember when I first went to California, I'd done Bobby on several network TV shows, and by this time I was pretty sure that I could make a living if I was to join him. So about November of '65, I went out there to play with Bobby, and we had a steady job at PJ's over on Santa Monica, I think. And we played there for 6 nights, and then after the record became a hit, we did a lot of traveling, and our first tour was about 6 weeks. And when we got back, there was a check from almost nothing. And I said, what is this? We played 1,000 gigs, did all these TV shows. Where's our money? It's rock. Expenses ate it all up. So I went home and I was packing my stuff, and Bobby came over and said, what do you have to stay? And I think at that time I told him, I said, I got to have $150 a week just to pay my bills, which in '65 I guess was, you could live on that. And I said, I got to have at least that. So he put me on salary to stay there. But that's what I was making with Bobby. But when I first started playing, we were lucky to make $5 a piece. In '63, when I bought my drums, I was playing 6 nights a week at the Green Frog Lounge downtown for $6 a night. And I think maybe on Sunday we had to play a jam session too, so we got $8.
Wow. Bobby and Carlos, thoughts on compensation for musicians back in your day?
In 1960, I left. So my thing was in L.A., and over there we made good money. We made $300 for one night, $250, depending on where you worked. But basically, everybody made more than $100. It was funny if they told, hey, can you do me a special favor and play a gig? I'll pay you $125. And they pay them the same amount now as it was then. And then it was a lot of money. I rented a 4-bedroom apartment, and I paid $65. My mom used to say, why? Mom, I'm making about $1,000 a week. I can afford it. You don't make that playing music. Musicians don't make no money. Okay. You see that house I own? That's music. But I was very lucky. I did a lot of, in those times they wouldn't pay you for the copyright. You would just go in. You would go in and they would tell you the union job was $165 per hour. You did an hour, and if you lasted 9 hours or 10 hours, they paid you. The union got their cut, and then you went to the union and you got your money. But then you did a lot of non-union jobs. So I made probably for 25 years, I made $1,200, $1,300 a week. It was good money there.
That was, it's
He
not
had,
money
he
now.
had a better manager than I did.
Not here.
You ought to be in the music business. Go ahead, Bobby.
Well, I started playing with the band, the Premiers. I think I was close to 12 years old. My brother used to play sax with him, and then he says, hey, get over here. He says, yes. You want to play piano? I said, yeah, I play it here in the house. No, with a band. I said, a band? What is that? So I got there and I started playing the piano. We used to play our first gigs in San Elizario. Jesus Christ, I said, where is this? I was a kid. The manager used to give me some lollipops and bubble gum. I was happy. I was chewing my gum and my lollipop. Then I would finish playing the piano the gig. The pianos were all broken. The keys were all busted. And I was full of Band-Aids in all my fingers. I said, Jesus, is this what I have to go through it? And we used to get paid maybe $5, $6. We were making a lot of money. I said, gee, well, to me it was because I can buy a lot of bubble gum with that. But anyway, we started playing, and back in 64, 65, the band, the Premiers, Mr. Guillen was the manager. He had to let it go. He says, oh, we're going to let it go. We don't want to play no more. You guys can go home. I said, home? I said, well, I'll tell you what, do you mind if I take it over? You do what you can. So I named it Bobby and the Premiers. So I started arranging all the music for myself and the music, and we played all the gigs. We used to start getting paid. I used to pay my musicians. Back then, they would make at least $50 a night. Okay, back then. And then we started going out of town traveling, so I started paying them by the week. They started making up to $300 a week. I figured if I pay them $300, I've always had a business mind. If I pay them $300 a week and I'm making $1,500 a gig, I can keep some money in my pocket. So I used to send money to my mother. Oh, you know, the Mexican people always do that, take care of mama and the family. So I used to send my mother some money. And my dad says, what are you making that kind of money? You got to work. You can't be making money like that. I said, Dad, you know, I enjoy it. But anyway, I never took drugs or anything. I was always clear, and my mind was always clear. I don't know about my musicians, but I always try to keep them clean.
Thanks, Bobby. It's about 1:15. We got about 45 minutes to go. So if there's anybody out there, you've got some questions that maybe come to your head and you want to ask the musicians anything, please come forward and stand up here next to me. We'll get the mic to you shortly. Dalton?
I'd like to acknowledge one of my oldest friends and possibly the first rock and roll drummer in El Paso, Mr. Bill Wilson over there. Back when I was in high school, I was dating a girl whose father was in the military, and we used to go out to Fort Bliss to the teen club when I was maybe 15 years old and watch the Rock Kings. And Bill was the first rock and roll drummer I ever got to see, and I was just fascinated. And every chance I'd get, I'd go out and watch Bill play. He's always been one of my heroes and a big influence on me. Thank you, Bill.
One of your preliminary questions was about our greatest influences. So I could tell you the direct influences. It was Johnny Cash, Buddy Holly, and then it became Bobby Fuller, and then the influences of the bands in the area at the time. But indirect, if you ask me who was the greatest indirect influence that I had, it would be that gentleman, because his brother was so enthralled with playing. He had started out as a drummer as well, but he wanted to play piano. He literally drugged me into the business, and that's why it all evolved, was because indirectly it was because of him, because of the influence that he had played upon his brother Bob, who actually put the group together. And I'm confused. I think I named it, but it could be up for grabs if memories fail us. But it was not ever Rod Crosby and the Intruders till probably 10 years after it started. We were just a four-piece band. But if there was any real leader in the band, it was Bob Wilson, and it was because of this guy right here. Otherwise, the Intruders would never exist.
Just with the show of hands, how many musicians in the audience that, you know, are certainly qualified to be up here, but someone that just people that were out there, if you could? Because I know I've seen two, there you go.
There's several out there,
Very good.
George. Gaylord Grimes sitting there. His brother, Ty Grimes, used to be the drummer for Ricky Nelson. We got up here on the front row, Zoomer Roberts, one of the finest harmonica players and singers.
Yes, sir.
Bass player. He was with the Shade Tree Boys. He's still playing. He's great. Stand up, Zoomer. Let everybody see you, man. Everybody loves Zoomer. Charlie Thomas, where are you, Charlie? You still here? Charlie?
He passed out.
Did he pass out? He's another good
hopefully
another
on
good
the
one.
way.
He's a guitar player, and he's still playing. He plays in several bands around town.
One of the first bands I remember seeing Mr. Martinez back there was the Sherwoods. Back there, Mr. Martinez. Ace Patterson. Ace Patterson played with Art Lewis, played drums for Art Lewis for a long time. He's here. I saw him.
Fellas, as long as I've been playing music,